The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hi, and welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this podcast, I'm going to do a 4-part series on pool startups with a panel of experts. These are definitely professionals in the industry that have more knowledge than me in startups, and I'm thankful for their time. The first member of the panel is Dave Penton. He is a builder in Southern California. He's also the host of Ask the Masters, which is a podcast that's geared towards builders and all things in construction. And definitely tune into his podcast if you're interested in pool building or the process of that. Again, that was the Ask the Masters podcast. And then David Rockwell is a pool service professional that's been doing startups for many, many years. And he's been in the industry pretty much forever. And he's going to give us his insight on startups. He's also the co-host of the Pool Pro podcast, which is a podcast geared more towards the pool service pro. And then Chip Blau is going to represent the National Plasterers Council, and he has a vast experience in pool startups, as his company in Arizona, as you're going to hear in his introduction, has done over 4,500 pools last year. And so definitely these three gentlemen have a vast knowledge of startups that they're going to share with us in this 4-part series. So let's jump into part 1 here and talk about the different startup methods and some other aspects of the startup process. Leslie's Pool Supplies is a proud partner of the Pool Guy Podcast Show. Leslie's Pool Supplies has been do-it-yourselfers and pool trade professionals' trusted partner since 1963, providing quality products and services to make pool care easy and solutions and expertise to do it right. So I'm joined today by Dave Penton and Dave Rockwell. And Chip, what's your last name?
Blau. You can say Blau. Yeah.
Okay, Chip Blau. And okay, I'll start with Dave Penton. And you want to introduce yourself, Dave, to everyone?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a pool builder. We work in the Orange County, LA area, so Southern California. Been in business since 1992, and we build basically all over the Southland. We're actually coming down into San Diego to do a job in not too distant future, but we specialize in just in the pool construction. We're pretty specialized. We don't do backyards or all of that. We're mostly just a pool construction specialty company. But the first 10, 12 years of my career, I spent in the maintenance side of things. So I have a real intimate understanding of cleaning pools and all of that. So.
Yeah, and then people will be familiar with your podcast also, Ask the Masters. It's pretty popular, and you're one of the hosts or co-hosts of that podcast.
Yep. Yeah, a number of us set that up a couple of years ago, and we're going strong. We're in the middle of our second year right now, and on the Ask the Masters podcast, you get real deep into the weeds on some of the technical aspects of pool construction. And then just recently, Dave Rockwell, who you're going to talk to in just a sec, we launched the Pool Pro podcast with him as well, which gets into more of the weeds on the service side of things. So that's we realized at Ask the Masters that there was a need for the other side of things as well.
Good. Yeah, and then I've listened to that podcast, of course, the Pool Pro podcast. And so Dave Rockwell, now there's going to be a lot of Daves here, so I'm just going to say, I'll just do Rockwell and then I'll do Penton. That way we're not Daving too much, you know. So Dave Rockwell, your background, you've been doing pool service pretty much forever, right?
Pretty much. I'm a 32-year veteran of this industry. My company is called Liquid Paradise. We service high-end pools around the LA area, and I also install ozone and chemical automation systems on pools all over Southern California. Great. And I do startups.
Okay, perfect. And then Chip, you are going to be representing the National Plaster Council. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I work with Cal Plastering Company. They're a pool plasterer in Phoenix, Arizona. We've been in business since 1978. Obviously, I haven't been there that long. I've been there for 23 years. We pebble and plaster about 4,500 pools per year. all over Arizona, but mainly in the Phoenix Basin.
Yeah, that's a lot of pools.
That's a lot of pools.
Okay, so let's just jump right in here, and then we'll talk about the 3 different methods of startup. I actually, tongue-in-cheek, I had 4 methods, but the first method is the traditional method, and I think that's the one the National Council is recommending now. And then there's the hot startup, there's the acid startup method, and then you have the barrel startup method, and then the 4th one is no startup at all, which is very common in my area, where they just build the pool, fill it with water, and then hand the homeowner the keys. So which method, or we want to go over each method, pros and cons and things like that?
I have a question for Chip. The traditional method, can you define that for us the way the NPC describes it?
In the NPC tech manual and in the videos that we produce, we're talking about where you fill the pool and you check the fill, the source water, but you don't really do anything to the pool until you come back when it's full. Start the equipment immediately, then adjust pH, total alkalinity. The NPC is the National Plaster Council. Then it's advised to put a sequestering agent in if it's not mandatory. You adjust calcium hardness on the 2nd day after you adjust pH and total alkalinity on the 1st day. And then for the next 2 days, you make a trip with lots of brushing, and you just monitor pH, total alkalinity, calcium hardness with brushing, and then the circulation of the pool. And then on the 4th day, you can hand it off. And then there's a whole sheet of instructions for the customer to continue to monitor the chemicals and brush and that kind of thing. So I guess that would be the normal startup. Oh yeah, and also cyanuric acid on the 4th day.
And the National Plasters Council, you guys actually certify people in your method. That's something that's new. Can you explain that a little bit to the professionals that are listening here?
Yeah, the NPC Startup Technician course. You can become a startup technician, and I don't actually know how long it's been going on. I think I was one of the first ones, and it's a course that Greg Garrett used to teach, and now it's been obviously taught by other people. And basically, it's a pool water chemistry course, and it talks a whole lot more than just what I just said about monitoring pH and total alkalinity. It talks a lot about pool water chemistry, what causes this, what causes that. It's an 8-hour course, and when you get a certification from that course, you're a National Plaster Council startup technician, and you can handle a startup correctly for a pool.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so between these methods, let's go over the hot startup, and then a newer method is the barrel startup that's been coming on. I'm catching some good positive feedback on that. But the acid startup is something that I'm familiar with, and so you want to go over this particular one, or the hot startup as they call it?
Sure, I'll tackle that one. Only because Dave Rockwell is kind of one of the pioneers of the barrel startup, so I'll let him. He knows that better than I think anybody in the country. So, but the hot start. When I started building pools back in 2002, the hot start was really kind of one of the standards. And Chip, I'd love to get your thoughts on it now that we've kind of seen this for a number of years. My understanding is the hot start really, to explain what it is, it's as soon as the pool gets filled, there's certain different formulas for how much acid you add to the water immediately. And in a traditional pool, you're adding anywhere from 4 to 10 gallons of acid immediately right on the startup. And so you're zeroing out your alkalinity. You're basically torching the plaster. And so the result is you tend to get a fairly uniform surface, but some of the drawbacks and the reason why my company has moved away from it in the last 5 to 10 years is that you really you're essentially acid washing brand new plaster. So, we've moved away from it just because I feel like it's too damaging on the initial startup to be chemically kind of hitting it so hard. The benefit to it is you do get a pretty uniform surface, but my opinion is that you really decrease the overall longevity of the surface by doing it that way.
It really depends on how a person defines hot start. We actually don't use the term hot start. We use the term low alkalinity process, or like Greg used to say, in water process. Hot start is kind of a scary name, but it basically is kind of what you're saying. But I have talked to some plasterers in other areas where their definition of the hot start is, like you say, they come dump a bunch of acid in a fresh pool and they leave and they let it self-raise. They let the pH self-raise back up. Well, Lord knows how long that takes. So yeah, you're burning the plaster for maybe a week or weeks. The way we do a low alkalinity process, as a matter of fact, I just did one today. I started one today. Is we have a formula, and depending on the color of the plaster and what type of finish it is, it's 1 gallon for every 3,000 gallons of water, 4,000 gallons of water. Depends on what it is. 1 gallon of acid for every 3,000 or 4,000 gallons of water. We do put a sequestering agent in it. I guess I won't name it because we're not naming names. And then we put a circulation pump in it, circulate it around, lots of brushing, and that's only for 3 days. And then we neutralize with sodium bicarbonate and soda ash and bring it back up. I understand the way people are talking about a low alkalinity process, but what I've been doing this a long time, and what I think is, you're out west. Have you ever seen the guys back east expose quartz? Yeah,
Yeah,
the
Yeah,
diamond bright
absolutely.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. They expose that diamond bright with straight acid, a lot of times with a weed sprayer or something like that. And this is no way near as intrusive as that. So I don't see where it would be damaging on these high performance surfaces that we do it on. Naturally, we wouldn't do it on a limestone sand, white marble cement finish. There's no reason to do it on that. But the high performance finishes that we do it on, we don't see any damage even coming back years later. But I understand the worry that people have over it. But that's our definition of a hot start. We call it low alkalinity process.
Okay, it makes more sense when you say it like that. And I would say the barrel startup would probably be the polar opposite of the zero alkalinity startup. So would you want to cover that, Rockwell?
Yeah, and not necessarily. The barrel startup is basically, I started doing it. I came up with the idea. Originally, I had been to classes by the guys from On Balance, and they talk about a high alkalinity startup to protect the plaster and not pull calcium out of the plaster as it cures. And I noticed that in their class, they showed a barrel that they were using to dissolve the bicarb as the pool was filling. And this kind of came out of the National Plasterer certification that I went to. There was so much stress put on water chemistry that and there's so much liability put onto service techs, because if there's a plaster problem, you're going to have a meeting with the homeowner, the plasterer, and the service tech. The first thing everybody does is bring their own test kit and point directly to water chemistry. And so I thought, well, okay, fine. I'm going to make sure that water is balanced from the minute it hits the bowl of the pool. And so I started gradually dissolving calcium into the water. Our water here in Southern California is very low calcium. It comes out of the tap anywhere from 70 to maybe 110 parts per million of calcium. And so that's the caveat I would say with any of these startup procedures, is you should base any decision you make on how to start up a pool on on the chemistry of the fill water. That's the most important thing that you need to know in order to make a decision on the right way to start up a pool. But as I said, just because of the liability involved here in starting up a pool and how the focus generally is going to go, the light's going to get shined on me first. I did two things. I bought the barrel and started doing the barrel startup, and I spent $1,500 on a photometric test kit that's going to outdo any test kit that they're going to bring to the pool to try and accuse me with. So it really started out of self-protection and self-preservation, but by giving the water what it needs, the calcium that it needs, it does reduce plaster dust. It does kind of all the good things that a hot startup does without the potential of damaging the plaster. We have a pool builder out here, JC Escobardo, and he calls plaster baby skin, brand new plaster. He says, a brand new baby comes out, you don't scrub it down with a Brillo pad, you don't use harsh soaps. So the same thing on brand new plaster that's just introduced to water. You treat it gently. What I do is if there's anything, a lower alkalinity treatment or a low pH treatment, or you have to use a little stronger brush, I wait until we're close to that 28-day period, and then have, do those type of corrections. But the most important thing, I think, is to get the actual integrity of the plaster strong and solid, and then you can address surface discolorations and those kind of issues.
Hey, Dave Rockwell, can you go over basically what that barrel startup entails? Like,
Sure.
It's kind of, I've never done one myself, so it's kind of foreign to me. But just give a quick 1 or 2 minute rundown of how that works.
Well, it's just a 55-gallon drum that your source water goes into, and sort of churns around and mixes. You can put your calcium, you can put your sequestering agents, even adjust the pH gently by allowing it to mix slowly with the water that's churning around in that barrel. And then I use a vacuum hose that goes into the pool, and the water comes out of the barrel with the balancing whatever I put in, and mixes with the water going into the pool. So we'll generally have one hose filling the pool directly, and then my barrel adding what I feel it needs. And a lot of people do barrel startups in different ways too. There's no one single protocol. We all kind of just are figuring this thing out ourselves, but it works a lot better if you kind of babysit it and add the calcium and the things you're adding to the pool to the barrel periodically. You can't just dump 50 pounds of calcium in and walk away. It's better if you do it gradually and kind of monitor it. All this takes time and effort. It's hard, but and it's time consuming, but it does take it does yield a really nice result. Dave Penton, I believe, has a video on the barrel startup, the one that they did, and that's a good place to start if you haven't done one and you're wanting to learn a little bit more.
And that video is on Ask the Masters YouTube channel?
I'll give you the link to it.
Okay.
It's actually pre-Ask the Masters. It's very early when people started doing it's just a good overview video.
Got it. And then the last startup method, which is no startup, which happens a lot here. So how do you recover from builders just filling the pool up and bailing? Like, what does the pool tech or customer do at that point? Like, a lot of the guys in my group get called a week later to do a pool startup, and it's already been filled for a week, and sometimes the customer's not even running the equipment long enough. So what is the recovery on something like that? Is there a recovery on something like that?
It depends on what kind of surface it is.
It's really a complete crapshoot. You've lost all of your control over the end result. But sometimes you can mitigate the dust, you vacuum the pool and brush it really good, adjust the chemistry, and you're okay. It doesn't really hurt. Other times the plaster can start to readhere, and you've got differences in the rough spots and other problems. A lot of it comes down to the chemistry of the fill water.
Yeah, and Chip, you mentioned a great point there, and I'd like you to elaborate on it, because for the most part, what you see in startups is you get the dust, but that's mostly on your smooth finishes. And I think that's kind of a lot of what we're talking about. Your traditional plaster, your quartz, your pebble fina, some of those which are smooth troweled finishes, as opposed to something like an exposed aggregate, a pebble tech or a wet edge, or those where you actually are exposing the stone. Those tend to be a lot more forgiving if it's lasted a week. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Well, on an exposed aggregate, like a pebble tech or something like that, the surface is mainly comprised with silica stones or silica pebbles, which are inert. Water chemistry doesn't affect them. They're held in place by a cementitious bonder, which is just like a plaster. Water chemistry or fill water, aggressive fill water, can affect the cementitious binder, but the main body of the surface is an inert silica stone or silica pebble. So it doesn't give off as much of the calcium hydroxide or plaster dust as a traditional plaster type, or a colored plaster, or even one of the premium upgraded plaster type surfaces that you just talked about, because those are mostly a cementitious surface without much aggregate in them. We check the fill water on every single pool we do. We don't do a lot of our own startups. We work mainly for pool builders, and the pool builders do the startups. But we have a log of every single pool we've ever done and what the fill water is, because, like Mr. Rockwell said, that's very important. All water chemistry starts at the tap. It really does. That's the most important thing. We keep a record of everything. We notify the pool companies, hey, you got a low calcium hardness fill here. And so we do that. The darker pebbles now held in place by dark pigmented colored cementitious binder. Now those will haze over and give you some calcium carbonate on it, and those are very important to have the correct water chemistry. But I understand Mr. Rockwell's point about protecting himself, and because he's a pool service. One of my jobs at Cal Plastering is diagnosing water issues with our pools and our surfaces, and then meeting the pool services that take care of them all. So if he lived in Phoenix, I would have already met him. So,
So the startup process is something separate from, of course, what the service tech normally would do on a regular basis, and a lot of builders will have their own startup guy, of course. Some just pay the pool service tech to do it. So the average charge in California, I think, is anywhere, depending on the city, of course. I think we're kind of zip code centric here. I've seen it as low as $400 and as high in some Orange County areas as $700 or $800 for the startup process. So does that sound about right to everyone out there?
It depends on what's involved and what it includes. If you're programming
exactly, if you're doing automation,
system,
it's a lot more. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, I've got startups that are $1,500 to $2,500, but I'm there for a month, and I'm doing a lot more than just brushing and vacuuming and adjusting chemicals.
When you hear the word startup and somebody wants you to come do a startup, do you have different startups that you offer, or is that a one day you show up, you start the pool up, adjust the chemicals, and then or you just said sometimes you're there a month, or is that you take care of the pool for a little while through the startup period?
What I've found through the years in starting up pools that I continue on and continue the service on them, the plaster changes, the water changes, the chemistry changes. It takes a long time for things to balance out and normalize. Minimum 2 weeks, sometimes the full month. And I want to see it through the entire process. feel confident in the result I'm going to get just doing a couple of days and then, kissing them on the cheek and saying, bye, it's your problem now. I want to see this thing through.
Yeah, I can tell you as a builder, I build startup into my contracts, and Dave Rockwell does a lot of the startups on the pools that we build. And just for rule of thumb, startup for me is a month. And then what my expectation for Dave Rockwell at the end of the month to provide for me is a pool that's balanced, that's stable, and it's fairly flat. I mean, it's the pH is no longer rising, and depending on what we're looking at, that ends up being anywhere from $1 to $1.50 per square foot. We do some really big pools, but I think that's a good kind of rule of thumb, and that includes the full 30 days of maintenance as well.
I think that's fantastic. The initial cure on all cementatious pools, is 28 days. That's the initial cure. That'll keep curing for years after that. But that initial cure is 28 days. So the builders that do what you guys are doing in our area, we don't see that many problems with their interior surfaces. But when there's just a startup consisting of checking pH and chlorine and getting the motor running, those are the pools that I usually have to come back to in 3 or 4 months that have interior surface staining or that kind of issue.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Chip, because I'll put on the time clock. Don't turn the heater on for 30 days. Don't get in the pool for 30 days. And people think that I'm crazy by being a little bit aggressive that way. But I think you're right. It takes a long time to cure. So I hope you found part 1 very helpful in pool startups, going over the different methods for you. And maybe you'll feel a little more confident about doing a startup if you're a pool tech. If you're a homeowner, you're going to, of course, feel more comfortable about the whole process of starting up your pool for the best outcome. And I hope you're able to join me for the other 3 parts of this series. If you're listening to this podcast on YouTube, the links for the other 3 parts of the series will be in the description there. Click on those. That'll take you to my weekly podcast show, and you can listen to part 2, 3, and 4 there. If you're listening to this podcast, you can go to my website, swimmingpoollearning.com, and on the banner, you're going to see the podcast icon. Click on that. It'll take you to the podcast show, and then you can see the other parts of this podcast series. And also in the description of this podcast, if you're able to see that on your app, you're going to see the links to part 2, 3, and 4. And if you're wanting more information, of course, on your pool care, my website again was swimmingpoollearning.com. And if you're in the pool service industry and you want to enhance your business, definitely check out my coaching program at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. Leslie's Pool Supplies has been do-it-yourselfers and pool trade professionals' trusted partner since 1963, providing quality products and services to make pool care easy and solutions and expertise to do it right.